Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the RFL podcast. We are now most of the way through the off season. Free agency has now been completed. We are imminently looking at training camp coming up. So it is a perfect opportunity for us to kind of start looking at the divisions and the conferences to work out who's going to be at the top of the pack, who's going to be sort of fighting for those middle areas and those playoff positions, and then who's going to be sort of maybe looking already into the following year. And well, it isn't Wobbegong. I haven't got him today. We actually have a different guest producer and guest presenter. We have none other than the Commissioner of the RFL, Rasp. Rasp, thank you very much for joining us on today's show. We are honoured to have the Commissioner of the RFL here. How do you think the off-season's going, and what do you think is interesting to talk about in the NFC that you're most excited to talk about today?
Well, thanks for having me. And I appreciate that you are doing these podcasts and missing Wabagama on the call. But he's got a good excuse for this. So congratulations, Wab, if you're listening. The off season has been great. 1983 has been anticipated as the draft year that everybody has been prepping for years. And we started in 1976 with the season, and people have been planning for the 1983 season since then. And if it puts it in perspective, a game season usually lasts about 3 to 4 months, I think. So this has been a few years in the making, and so it's turned out to be as good as we were hoping with the amount of trades and things that were happening. And so now we have a whole transformation of the league, I think, from where some of the power shifts we're going to see move, or maybe some of the power that has been lost. Some of the teams have been gained back, and so the the East on both NFC and AFC are some of the most interesting areas where I think we've seen some movements.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been a fascinating off-season. The draft obviously was absolutely crazy, and we talked a little about that in the last episode. And well, now we can talk about teams and where they think we're going to land and what's going to play out possibly this season. But yeah, I agree with you. Let's just dive straight into the NFC East. I mean, in terms of looking at that division, we've got some absolute powerhouses in there and some teams that have quite strategically rebuilt now and maybe looking to be vying for that top position. Where do you see this kind of playing out? What teams do you think are going to be towards that top of that division?
So the AFC is going to be fighting it out tooth and nail, I think. At the top of the list, you have Dallas, who's actually won the most Super Bowls in the league, or not won, but or maybe they have. I have to think about it. But they have been in the most Super Bowls in the league for sure. And their team is starting to age. They've done a few things to do it, but they've been running off of their playbooks. They've been running off of what they've been successful at. And so other teams are ready to kind of move and step into that number one spot. And you have Philadelphia, who has made some moves. It hasn't been huge amount of moves, but they've done some right moves, and they've always been competitive with Dallas, going back and forth for who owns the division leads, and so that's always a fun fight to see. And then there was New York, who owned the 1981 draft with the amount of picks, and really came out firing in 1981, where they were able to pick up some really well known players and had a lot of success. 1982, they had a sophomore slump, for sure. So we'll be eager to see if they pick up where they left off in 1982, or if they're going to pick up into the 1981 team to make a run at it. Because even though they were drafted in 1981, their talents are still only 2 years, right? So they're a fairly young team, and the owner of New York's booth is a really good owner who's competitive, and so I see they're also going to be, New York's also going to be competing for the top. And then there's St. Louis, who really they drafted Joe Montana way back. They've been running off the curtails of Peyton. They've been hurting because they haven't had defense, and St. Louis last year had made significant improvements and actually made it into the wild cards. They had a really strong ending to that season, and they had a good draft with some defensive players. And I think you're going to see St. Louis also competing for the division title. And then lastly, there's Washington, who owned last year's first picks in the draft and this year's first picks in the draft. And this year, Washington was able to trade down. As if you watched the podcast 3, Washington did some really good moves and traded down. They still got a solid quarterback in Kelly, and really solidified that team. But not only did they have the picks in the beginning, they also were able to stack some of the picks at the end of the draft. And because of that, they were able to get 2 sleepers in the drafts who are going to be solid players as well. So with all the players that Washington has drafted over the next 2 years, Washington has the talent easily to complete and take that division. Honestly, out of all these, I don't know. My gut feels like St. Louis may be ready and primed to take control, but any of those teams, I think, have the ability, have the roster, and have the right GMs in place to take them to that division win. I think that is going to be a fight for all of them.
Yeah, I mean, Rasp, listening to you kind of narrate through the NFC East there, the first question I was going to ask is, it sounds like you're almost suggesting every single team could win this division, and I think that is a complete fair reflection of how this division looks so far. As you've alluded to, I mean, you've got the perennial sort of top end of the division that has been there for several seasons now, maybe since the start of the RFL in Dallas. So you've got Dallas and Philadelphia, who are kind of the established dominant pair really in this division. Maybe getting towards the back end of their their capability. The teams are aging. Maybe some of the gaps they've had previously they haven't addressed have kind of now may become more of an issue because of the sheer speed of delivery for some of the others. I mean, you've got St. Louis we talked about with. I really, is there a better back pairing than Montana and the likes of Peyton? I probably don't think so in the entire RFL. But then you've got New York. I think fair to say, Rasp, down season last year, probably expected a lot better from them. I think when they came off the back of the previous season, we were probably in discussions for them to be a contender. Had a really disastrous start to last season, and they were vying to get themselves back up to the top. And then, Washington have, as you said, have had a fantastic offseason for a whole host of reasons in the draft and some sleeper picks and a good free agency before that, let's not forget. So, I don't know. I guess the question we need to ask ourselves, Rasp, with the NFC East is, do we think this is finally the season that the top dogs of Philadelphia and Dallas actually drop down for age reasons, for just general talent deficits that they've maybe lost over previous seasons, or and do we think that they are dropping down, or is it a case of the guys that we've mentioned in St. Louis, Washington, and the likes of New York have now stepped up their game in terms of personnel, in terms of quality of roster to overtake them?
So Dallas, kind of looking through their transactions, haven't really done much this year. They did add a defensive end to help with their team, but they haven't really signed anybody. And from a draft perspective, they still didn't have a pick until the 3rd round. And so I don't see. I think Dallas is at the peak of their right now at their peak. And so it's theirs to lose, right? Philadelphia, on the other hand, had picked up some decent free agents, and actually had a pretty solid draft, even number 1 and 2, picking up another defensive end and a guard to help solidify it. They had the players in place, and when we said Philadelphia had a bad year, let's say what it is. If they were 11-5, that was a bad year for Philadelphia. That's pretty good saying something about the team. And that was actually better than some of the teams that made it to the playoffs that were division titles, including my team, the Vikings. So they definitely deserve to have been in the playoffs, even though they didn't make it. But I do feel that Philadelphia is unless they're retweak their playbooks, put some more focus in it, that they're kind of at where they're at too. I think they're going to be competing with Dallas. So it's really the other teams to win. And I feel Washington is too young right now. I think they have another year to go. I think they're going to do great. New York, they have to get down and focus. They have the roster for it. St. Louis, I think, after the winning streak that they had at the end of the season last year, um, and as far as their draft goes, I forgot who they drafted, so I'm taking a quick look. Oh yeah. They picked up a good receiver, a tackle, and solidified their defensive backs. I think they picked up the right players there. Um, I feel like it's gonna. I think if there's gonna be a team that's gonna take it from Dallas or Philadelphia, it's gonna be St. Louis. But I feel like any of the teams could have the ability to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think kind of agree with you. I think probably Dallas are still far ahead in terms of capability of roster, playbook, strategy. As you said, they've still got so much talent on this team. I mean, they've got a ridiculous amount of talent, right? They've got probably a Hall of Fame player at pretty much every position, more or less. So I think they're still going to be at the top of the division, even if they didn't have as good an off season as maybe some of the others in the NFC East. I think I had to put money on it and pick between New York and St. Louis. I'm probably going with St. Louis. Similar to you, I think they had a very good off season. Not groundbreaking, nothing revolutionary, but they made some good picks. They made some good free agency signings. Then New York, and I'm probably going to be going Philadelphia and Washington. So I think Philadelphia is probably going to be the one for me that drops off. I think they could be looking at being that borderline sort of 500 team, which means that, crazy enough as it sounds, in the East it probably does drop them down to that fourth position. I think to topple Dallas, we're probably looking at a 13 plus win season, right, for another team. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I see it playing out. And I agree with you. Washington have had a fantastic off season, but there's still that question mark, right? Can they turn that fantastic off season into a fantastic season? And not sure yet. We'll see how it goes out the gate. Obviously, it's going to be interesting to see those first couple of weeks and see how things pan out. But I kind of see the NFC East as being it's one of those divisions I am certainly going to be watching every single week, because it's going to chop and change. We're going to see different teams vying, different teams competing. We're going to see teams upset each other. I can see all of them beating each other on any given day. It's just probably Dallas is the one that I still see the benchmark sort of slightly ahead of the others in that division. But let's move on to the Central Division, which is obviously your own with Minnesota Vikings. Be interested to get your reflections on how the Vikings offseason has gone and what you think about the other teams in the Central, which I'm sure you have been paying close attention to see where you probably stack up this season.
Yeah, it's the Central. I feel, and I hate saying this because it's my own team. I do feel Minnesota is probably going to be the team that needs to be beat. Um, Tampa has always competed 2 years ago. I think the 1981 season, Tampa had a really strong running and was a scary looking team. And then something happened. They may have tweaked their playbook too much, and then they dropped off. But Tampa continues, the roster continues to get better. So I feel like Tampa will still make a run at it to take it away from Minnesota. Um, Detroit also has had a strong offseason, and Detroit has a strong GM. Waiting in the wins, they've been very quiet, and I feel that they're going to make a run at it as well. So I think that between Detroit, Tampa, and Minnesota, those are the top tier teams. Chicago didn't do a lot in the offseason to better themselves. So I'm feeling they're going to be an average team this year. And then Green Bay has a new owner who has put a lot in enthusiasm. Um, and I feel they're making all the right decisions. They're going to compete. Um, they picked up some strong players in both the free agents and the draft. I think they have another year or two, but I feel when that owner gets it to where they need to, they're going to be a scary team. My personal perspective of Minnesota, in 1982, I made a decision that I didn't want to get into the 1983 race. And so I traded out for most of the picks for 1983 and later, and took a chance on trying to get my quarterback in Wade Wilson, who was great. And really, I have a strong offense. I think Minnesota underperformed last year. for on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, I didn't do much to improve them last year. So I tried to focus on defense this year a little bit more outside of the trade with Carter and Duper. And I don't think I hit the mark of where I needed to get it to. I feel I'm going to be competitive for division lead. I think it's gonna not. I didn't do enough to get into to take me to the Super Bowl this year, but we'll see. I missed short on the defensive ends, but and the linebacker I think a little bit. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when I look at this division, there's two teams I have at the top, and that is Minnesota and Detroit, and for slightly different reasons. I think Minnesota, you guys have got a very well established roster. It's been there, done it, won the division. Sort of, you did a bit of a retooling from the previous GM in terms of it being probably more of a competitive roster, more of a contending roster, but aging, moved a bit of a re-establishment, and now you're kind of back up at the division. I do agree with your assessment that the Vikings as a roster is probably not there to compete with some of the big guns of the rest of the RFL. But who knows? With playbook strategy, with some of the personnel you've got, it could happen, right? If you end up in a position where your playoff game ends up being a sort of a run and gun type sort of thing, where high scoring type of situation, I think you can compete with anyone. I think when it comes down to nitty gritty of, for example, playing against a Dallas who have an unbelievable defensive set of personnel, you could end up struggling there. But in terms of the other team that I have competing at the top of the Central is Detroit. I think the simple reason is that I think Detroit has found its quarterback now. Bobby Herbert, in terms of the second round steal we discussed on the last episode. I think he is just good enough for the likes of Stuart, the GM there, to take this team and just put it back up another level. He's got enough to make the difference between probably some of the deficits of the roster and where this team could be with his skill. So I kind of see him taking that Detroit team and really giving you a good run for the division this year. That's how I see the top end playing out. And then in terms of that middle pack, I think Green Bay are going to be down the bottom. Simple reason is new GM, lots of challenges facing them in terms of the personnel. As you said, they're making the right moves, but they are still far away from probably being a playoff competitive type of team at the moment, which I think is a fair assessment if you ask the GM who's joined as well. And then you've got this sort of Chicago and Tampa Bay thing, and I think Chicago are going to be down sort of the bottom end, probably nearer to Green Bay than they are to Tampa in that middle pack. Simple reason being is I think that they haven't probably made the type of sort of moves and transactions that they probably needed to do this season to really elevate the team again back up another level. I mean, there's some really good personnel on this team. Good quarterback, good running back. The offensive line is pretty solid. The receiving corps is questionable, if I'm being honest. But I mean, they've just got some deficits in terms of the defense and the back positions, in my opinion. So I think that they probably needed to do a bit more this offseason if they really wanted to try and compete. And then I think Tampa's just the odd one out, really, to be honest with you. As you kind of said, it's interesting your reflection that the team was making really good progress, and obviously something didn't quite click, and now they've kind of made this regression. And not something I've observed, to be honest with you, but probably because I'm not in the Central Division to look at it that closely. So I think they're just going to be the odd one out, really, which means they're going to be in that middle of the division. They're going to be better than the likes of your Green Bays and Chicago's, but I don't think they're going to be at the level of the Detroit and you guys in the Vikings. So if I had to put money on it, again, similar to the East of who I think is going to come out on top, I think it's going to be Minnesota. But I think Detroit are really going to give you a good run for their money this year. But yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of how you see it playing out, do you think Detroit are your closest competitor for the Central, or is there someone else you are keeping an eye on as well?
Yeah, Detroit is. I think it's going to be that sneaky good team that's gonna sneak up this year. That's the one I think I'm most concerned with. But I'm always keeping an eye on Tampa for sure.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and then I think in terms of the division, I think it's probably going to be. If I had to put finger down on it, I think probably 10 with 10 wins will be enough to win the Central this year. Whereas if I look at the East, I think you need to win 13 or 14 possibly to win that East division. I think it's just going to be that crazy. You need to have that comfortable lead, and I could be completely wrong because the East might end up taking games off each other, and it could end up being this weird sort of situation where actually a 9-win team probably gets them over the hump in the top, but we'll see. But let's move on to the final division in the NFC, which is the West. We've got the New Orleans Saints, the team that's probably, in my opinion, going to be up the top and contending. Then we've got LA, San Fran, and Atlanta. And I guess, how do you see that one playing out? Do you think the Saints are that far ahead of the other three teams, I should say, or do you think any of the others have made good strides to kind of get back up to competing with the Saints, who obviously had a fantastic season last year?
Yeah, I think I think the Saints have the right roster. They have the right GM, and they're a proven team. They didn't lose any major players, and they added some additional good players. And they missed making it to the Super Bowl for the second year in a row by a few points. And I think that you're going to see them continue to, if not progress, even if they stay the same that they were the last 2 years, they're a solid team. I think they're going to be the clear winner of the West, in my mind. San Francisco is in total rebuild. It's got a new owner who's learning the game. The owner has done it has been very active in the league as well, and shows a lot of enthusiasm, and looks to be making a lot of the right roster moves. I think it's they have an uphill battle for that team, but you never know if they surprise us on that. But I like what I've seen him doing on that with that team. It's good to see. Atlanta, I feel I'm not. I need to go. Sorry, I'm not as familiar with Atlanta I should be. Atlanta had a lot of free agent signing. They had some decent signings on there. They made some good trades as well with the Dolphins. They gave up some picks for the trades, but they filled in some holes that they need. Atlanta was always Atlanta and Los Angeles have been always kind of at the run for the top of the division, but the Saints I think they're just too good, or too far beyond these other teams. So between Los Angeles and Atlanta, I think Atlanta has the edge, and the reason is Los Angeles had owner left last year, and it left the team with a lot of cut players, and then the new owner that came in, who was very enthusiastic about taking the team, came in and was learning the game, and unfortunately for personal reasons had to take a step down from the team, and so it's a kind of a hold pattern for hoping the owner will come back. So we've been trying to make sure we're taking care of it, but without an owner on it, I think there were some good roster moves for that team. So Wabagon helped do some of the free agents, and between Pete Gorilla and myself, we when we saw that there was no conflict of interest, like I didn't have a lot of picks in the draft, so I was able to do it. So we drafted for Los Angeles. So we feel that the team is solid. And matter of fact, if a coach took over, they could be competitive. But they would be a mere mid-tier, I think. Between Los Angeles, Atlanta are going to be your mid-tiers. San Francisco is going to be your rebuilding, and New Orleans is going to be division winner, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the easiest division to call in terms of the NFC. I think the Saints are going to run away with this, and it won't surprise anyone for the reasons why, right? They had a fantastic season last year. Incredibly unlucky in terms of not getting to the Super Bowl. They had one of the best defenses in the league, and they haven't really lost much. They've added a great wide receiver through free agency. We talked about the last couple of shows, I think, and I think they're just that step above everyone else in the division. I think the interesting thing is going to be that plays out here is going to be, I think Atlanta are going to probably be the second slot, and I think that's a fair reflection of probably the team making some decent signs in the off season. GM experience probably going to end up there. I think the thing would watch in the West really is going to be San Francisco, LA, and it is, as you said, LA does not have a GM at the moment. They probably have a better roster on paper than the likes of the San Francisco 49ers. But it'd be interesting just to see how the team does with no GM, with AI set up, AI running it. Teams will take advantage. Some teams will be able to put up 30, 40 points on them probably quite easily, just because of how the AI works. But so I'll be interested. I like to think really positively. I think the 49ers, despite it being new GM, is really trying to learn, really active, engaging, as you said, sort of really trying to get to grips with the team. I can see them being third place position. I can see the Rams sort of being down the bottom, and then I could probably see obviously the Saints at the top and Atlanta in second for this one. But I think New Orleans will have easily 11 plus wins. Everyone else is probably going to be in that 2 to 7 win range, if I'm being perfectly honest. So that's how I see the West playing out, really. Excuse me. So let's have a bit of a recap in terms of the NFC then. So interestingly, I think from our reflections, we've got the East as being sort of the most competitive division, probably the most number of contending teams sitting there possibly. The Central, we've got sort of a couple of good teams, probably not the contender sitting in there. And I think the West, we've got a contender with everyone else sitting in there. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think probably we've got in our minds that the teams that are going to end up being possible Super Bowl contenders this year is going to be the likes of Dallas, St. Louis, Minnesota because of the division win, and then probably New Orleans. And I know you're going to say Minnesota's probably not because of your reflections on where the talent is of the team, but is there anyone else in the NFC that you think could come out and possibly be that contender up there with those 4 teams?
So I would definitely put top tier would be Dallas, New Orleans. I think the second tier would be the Philadelphia, St. Louis, Minnesota tier. I think Atlanta has a capability. It doesn't feel like they have the roster quite yet, but I think they have the capability and the desire to take it up there. But I feel it's going to be what we're going to see is 2 teams come from the East, 1 team from the West, 1 team from the Central, and then the third team maybe Detroit, maybe Atlanta, or maybe a third team in the NFC. I think that's what it's going to play out to.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I do agree with you. I think the Saints and Dallas are going to be the top perennial. You got to knock them off the plinth to get past them, and I think you're going to have the likes of probably St. Louis, Minnesota, probably Detroit, sort of in that sort of middling sort of competitive sort of field piece. And who knows? And who knows in one game situation whether they can come out on top. But that's how I kind of see it playing out, really. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see sort of how some of that works out and how that plays out, because the East is certainly not going to be an easy one for anyone to get through, even Dallas this year. Central, you've got sort of Detroit and Minnesota competing, and in the West, Atlanta is the interesting one, right? Is that who knows? They might stack up enough wins to really possibly be in a shout, but I think Saints are going to take that division comfortably. Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of other things that we could talk about with the NFC, is there any team that doesn't have to be a contending team, is there any team you're really interested to watch and see how they perform this year?
San Francisco and Green Bay, for sure. San Francisco and Green Bay for sure, because those are the 2 rebuilding teams. And I think both of them have showed the energy and the enthusiasm to take those teams up. So I'm curious to see how far up they're going to get with these teams. Are they going to? I feel like there could be a coach of the year. It may come from one of these 2 teams. The other one is Washington, right? So Washington traditionally has been up in maybe the third slot in the NFC East, and has always been the team to be able to beat Dallas. They always seem to be Dallas's Achilles heels. When Dallas would lose, it would always be against Washington. last year that changed. Washington lost those battles to Dallas. I'm eager to see with all the talent that they have if the coach is able to put together the plays to utilize this talent and actually get back to defeating Dallas. Because they've always seemed to have that upper hand. So I'm um, anxious to see that play out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, Washington is the interesting one. I think just because of the draft they've had and just seeing how some of these guys play. But I think the thing I'm most going to be interested in, I'm not going to throw you a team. I'm going to be really interested to see who puts up better numbers. Is it going to be Jim Kelly with Washington, or is it going to be the likes of Bobby Herbert with Detroit? I think that's going to be fascinating for me, is to watch those two rookie quarterbacks. One taking the first round, one taking the second round, one arguably on a more competitive team at this moment in time in Detroit, and one on a team that's probably going to do well, but I think they're going to be really, really have real tough challenges just because of the division they're in. And I think it's going to be interesting how that battle possibly plays out in terms of NFC and you know, both of them I think are viable candidates to possibly rookie of the year if they get the right situation. So I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out. Yeah, I mean Green Bay and San Fran, I can see why you'd want to follow them. Two active GMs, new, probably the most likely to cause to overperform. Right, two active GMs, team that's not expected to do absolutely anything in terms of performance this year. Pretty much got a free hit at it. Who knows? They could end up taking games off of some of the top teams, possibly getting their win percentage up higher than we were anticipating here. Certainly. I think the other thing I'm interested to see is, who knows, maybe the Rams will get a GM before the start of the season, or maybe 4 or 5 games in, and it'd be interesting to see if the GM can turn them round from probably going to be at the bottom of that Western division to maybe being competitive, maybe sort of getting back into the hunt of it. That could be a fascinating watch as well. If they're, we could end up in a situation where the Rams are going into sort of week 5, 0-4. New GM comes in, can they win enough games to kind of get them back into competitive position and maybe pip Atlanta to that second spot? Maybe that'll be a fascinating watch for me. But yeah, I think the NFC's there's a lot of interesting stories in the NFC. I think the division personally I'm going to watch this year is going to be the NFC East. I just think that's going to be an absolute bloodbath, and I'm fascinated to see the likes of Dallas and Philadelphia compete with some of these up and coming teams in New York. Obviously St. Louis a bit more established, and Washington have had a fantastic off season. I think that's the division for me I'm going to personally watch if I had a league pass for the RFL in the NFC. But I guess outside of your division, are you watching the West or the East in terms of your viewing?
It's definitely East. I think East on both conferences are going to be the where to watch it for sure.
I think so. I think it's going to be great. But yeah, no, absolutely. So I think what we're going to obviously come back next time and talk a little bit about the AFC. Rasp, it's been great to have you on for this episode. Any final thoughts or reflections on the NFC, or anything you want to throw in to get people thinking about the AFC for the next episode?
Yeah, and it's not so much about the AFC; it's more about how this is going to play out and the predictions. So for a long time, there's been a lot, especially a lot of the veteran GMs have been relying on specific plays in their playbooks and genres that have made them very successful. And with 25 coming out, some of those plays or many of those plays have been either removed or changed. And I feel like this is going to be an interesting year, that some of the teams that performed in the past we may not see the success rates of those teams that we've seen, and some of the teams that haven't, some of the newer owners might this might just kind of balance that the playing field for them, or at least get it a little bit closer from that gap perspective. Um, so I think playbooks, those owners that embrace revamping their playbooks for 25 to adjust it for 25 are going to be very successful, and those that rely on their older playbooks, you're 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 going to see some teams that may have been really successful struggle. So it will be that's a wild card in all this, I think. It remains to be played out. So I'm eager to see how that happens.
I mean, that's a great note to end on. We've probably had one of the best drafts in RFL history. followed by one of the craziest changes from draft day sports 24 to 25, which means there's only one thing that can happen, right? Complete and utter chaos, and who knows what's going to happen this year. But fantastic reflection on the NFC. We'll be back next time to talk about the AFC. Rasp, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I'm sure you'll be back for the NFC chat on the next episode.
I will. Thank you for having me.